Hi guys, so today's video is going to be my June wrap up. Technically, I'm filming this still within the month of June, so there's a couple things that I still plan to pick up before the month is over. I'll mention those really quick. That would be Valor, the sequel to Malice, and then the Ikasar Falcon, which is the sequel to the Wolf of Oren Yaru. I haven't officially started those yet, so I can't comment on them, but if you are interested in seeing my thoughts on the first books in those series, I'll have the links to my reviews in the description bar down below. I am going to be mentioning a few books from toward the end of May, just because I feel like June is when all the mid-year book stuff kind of was coming up, and it felt sort of silly to do wrap-up style videos when we were going to be doing mid-year wrapping up type of videos, so I'm going to include a couple from May. But anyway, starting with the DNF, we have The Martian. This is a story about a man who is stranded on Mars. Most of you have probably heard of it. There was a movie with Matt Damon. It's been, I believe, a Goodreads Choice Award winner, so I am going against the grain here. I am very much the unpopular opinion, but I DNF'd it about a third of the way through. I found the main character incredibly annoying, so annoying, and I have had a few people on my blog where I mentioned this say they felt like his almost, to me it felt like an unrealistic amount of optimism. They felt like it's a coping mechanism for the fact that he is just trying not to dwell, but I can kind of understand that to a degree, because last year, as many of you know, I went through a very difficult time in my life. My father was dying, I was his caretaker, and absolutely, for his sake, for my sake, throughout the day, you're doing that thing where you're putting a smile on your face and you're trying to find anything to make the day a little better, to make every aspect of his life, your life, seem great or as good as it can be. You try to look on the bright side of things, but when you lay down to sleep or when you're alone, you have to just so much talk yourself out of those depressing thoughts. You have to really push through, and that's what I wanted from this. I didn't mind if he had these more optimistic, this attitude, but I so badly wanted to get more glimpses into that. And when it comes to survival stories, I also want to imagine myself in those circumstances. And this is a circumstance no one's ever been in, which for some people is the appeal, is trying to imagine what that would be like. I don't think that the author is without knowledge at all. I think he's very knowledgeable, but at the end of the day, there is still some aspects of this that are unrealistic or make-believe. So that just made it even harder for me, because if it were any other type of survival story where you're stranded in the wilderness or something like that, if there was a factual inaccuracy, that would sort of, for me, affect my enjoyment, and the whole book, I just have to suspend disbelief. And I don't know, I just always was hesitant to pick this one up because I just had a feeling it wasn't going to be my cup of tea, but my friend loves it, so many other people love it, I gave it a chance, and the main character is just so annoying to me. I wasn't a fan. Very sorry to anybody who really loves that book. I'm very happy for you if you do, and if it sounds interesting, definitely pick it up because everyone else seems to love it. But the book that I'm currently reading that I am loving is The Bitter Twins. Please don't let my view of The Martian, which many of you probably do like, affect your interest in this. Don't be like, oh, well, she clearly has bad taste because I want so many people to read this series. So the first one is Ninth Rain. It's about this different fantasy world that is so fascinating, unique, unlike anything I've ever read. It plays on a few familiar tropes, but turns them on their head. So, for example, you have this elven-like group of people that feed off of this giant tree's sap. It's how they kind of keep their almost immortality, because they can die, but they are basically elves. But then something happens to the tree, and they can't eat its sap or drink its sap anymore. And now they're trying to drink human blood, so then there's a vampire element so that they can maintain their almost immortality, but it backfires because it starts something called the Crimson Flux, which is this horrible illness that ends up killing off a bunch of them, and humans, as a result of them drinking their blood, these people are called Eborans, now humans don't like them, and then there's this looming threat in the background where you know that there's these cycles of war that come from an unknown enemy. The only people who really could fight off this unknown enemy were the Eborans, but most of them are dead. The only ones that are left, humans don't really get along with them, and the whole book you're like, So That's only part of it. It's fantastic. The characters are great. I absolutely love it. If it sounds even remotely interesting to you, please give it a try. I know it's very hard to find. Every now and then it goes out of stock. It is not readily available. It's published in the UK, and if you want the ebook, I think you have to live in the UK, and there's no audiobook, so I know it's not the easiest thing to get, but you can find copies of it, usually through book depositories where I got mine. If it sounds good, please check it out. It's very good. And the second one is delivering. I'm loving it. There's other aspects of it that are improved upon, and we're getting more time with the characters. I'm just so excited. I love this series. Next up, we have a YA fantasy, but more so historical fiction, which would be Rebel Rose. So the idea for this series, it's called the Queen's Council, is that it's going to be taking various different, basically Disney princesses, and it's going to follow them after the events of the stories that we're familiar with. So it's kind of a what would happen after. And things aren't looking so good, and they place these characters within actual historical events. So in this one, we have from Beauty and the Beast, Belle, and the idea is we're looking at the French Revolution. When I heard about the story, I thought we were going to more so be focused on the French Revolution, but in actuality, it is more of like they're catching glimpses of what's going on in Paris, and they don't want those same events to happen where they are. So as a result, I think it's perhaps a little less bloody than you might expect given the premise, but I still really enjoyed following Belle as she's trying to prevent these terrible things from happening. I was really surprised because she is, at the end of the day, it's a YA book, and she's married, which is very unusual for YA. So her and her husband are both kind of trying to tackle these things together. That was an element that I wasn't expecting, but very much appreciated. There wasn't necessarily a whole lot of drama between her and her husband. It wasn't a romance-heavy story. It really was her trying to handle things as much as possible, and her husband was helping her, but he sometimes would be off doing other things, trying to take care of stuff on his own. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I liked its commentary on classes, but I do think that it might come across just a tad boring to some people. But if you're in the mood for just a nice, interesting, maybe not too fast-paced kind of a story, I would say this one is a good one. Next up, we have Malice. I did do a couple of reading vlogs where I was reading this over the course of those two different reading vlogs, and I did a review. So I'm sure a lot of you have already seen my thoughts on this one. I was right in the middle. I did not love it. I did not hate it. There's so much about it that I could see myself loving the series, but I do think that this first one is a lot of setup, and it might pay off. I'm not sure. It's a multiple point of view story. We have a lot of different point of views, and it's sort of a chosen one and also an evil chosen one. There's good and there's bad, as the prophecies will say, except for those haven't actually started yet. So as you're following all these different characters, you're sort of wondering who is going to be the good guy and who is going to be the bad guy. I did find certain aspects of it to be a little bit predictable. It does follow some of those very familiar fantasy tropes, but I'm still eager to see where it goes. So many people say each book in the series gets better and better. It is very action heavy, so if you're a fan of that, definitely pick this up. It's kind of your classic Western European inspired fantasy as well. So if you like that, this is just going to feel so cozy and familiar to you. The action scenes for me, I think there were perhaps a few too many, and they started quite early, which I'm okay with, but because it's multiple point of view, I didn't feel that connected to anybody at the beginning. I didn't really know who was who and what was what and why I should care. So when those action scenes came, I was kind of just like waiting for the action to be done, sort of a thing. And I do think that this book could have been trimmed down a little bit, but I still want to see where everything goes. Next up, we have The Wolf of Oren, Yaru. This follows a woman who is the queen of this particular land, and 5 years ago, her husband left. You don't really know why he left. They also have a son together that our main character, Queen Talion, has been caring for. She loves her son very much, and she also, for her son's sake, would love it if her husband would come back. She also finds this to be a very important marriage because it was, there's just I don't want to say too much, I don't want to give away too much, but it's very important for maintaining peace. So regardless of whether she loves him or not, she does feel that it's important to maybe try to work things out with him. And it's not like a divorce story or something like that. Like, it's just a relationship the whole time. That's not quite what it is. It's very political. And we follow this character as she has the opportunity to find out if she can meet with her husband again and patch things up. You as the reader are a little bit in the dark as to what happened between them, but there's so much at play. There's so much at risk. And this character, I've described it as she really has to claw her way through the story, because you don't know, is she walking into a trap? Has her husband, if she does get to meet with him, is it going to be really him? Or if it is him, are there people controlling him? Is it even him that wants to lay out these terms, or is it someone else? And you don't know what's going on. Beyond that, there's a lot of world building, which I think will be very appealing to those of you who appreciate that. It helps you feel more immersed in the story, especially if you like descriptions of food. But I also think that it being first-person narration and only following this one character makes it still accessible, even though there's, I would say, rather dense world building. So overall, I very much enjoyed it. I read it in a day, and I can't wait to pick up the sequel. Next up, we have Blade of Secrets by Trisha Levenseller. This is a YA fantasy that was exactly what I was hoping it would be. It's silly, and the banter between all the characters is fun and kind of lighthearted. I've read 2 other books by this author. One would be The Shadows Between Us, and then the other one would be Warrior of the Wild. I've described Shadows Between Us as super over the top, ridiculous, but a good time, and Warrior of the Wild as very cute and made me happy. And this one, it's a little bit more adventurous. We follow a character who has magical abilities that are revolving around the creation of weapons. She is a blacksmith, and her magical abilities have been they're gaining recognition, especially by someone who wants a weapon, you think for good purposes, but then you find out, it's in the synopsis, that's not a spoiler, you find out that this person actually wants to use this weapon for not great purposes. So our main character with her sister and 2 other characters kind of go on the run. I very much enjoyed this. It is the first book in a duology, so one criticism I have is I think that this book could have been a standalone, but I'm still going to pick up the second one, see where it goes. Last on the list, we have a thriller, which is very different from what I typically read, but I did a whole vlog where I talked about why I picked this particular book up. One, it just sounded fun, but also my mom likes thriller mystery type books, and we went on a little mini road trip together, so I was like, oh, we should buddy read a book together. She's not a big reader. She works very, very hard, and her brain gets lots of attention in her job. So she just, when she comes home, she doesn't always want to use her brain anymore. She just wants to relax. And I completely understand that. So she just doesn't get the chance to read very often. But when she does, she likes these books that are kind of quicker, keep you on the edge of your seat. You're like, what the heck is happening? Who's who? What's what? And I was like, hey, Mom, we should read this one. It follows a character who is a therapist who her niece's friend at Cambridge has been murdered. And now the niece is like, please come out. I could really use you as support. But then this particular character, Mariana, is like, I'm a therapist. I can kind of figure things out when it comes to people and their trauma and their emotions. I wonder if I can figure out who the murderer is. That's basically the setup. And she's convinced that the murderer is the Greek tragedy professor who everybody finds really charming. He has this kind of interesting group of girls that are kind of forming their own fan club of him. They're really obsessed with him, and he definitely plays into it a little bit. So she's like, I think it's this guy. But it's one of those books where every character that pops up, it seems like they're the person. I called it very early on, which I was really proud of myself as to who was the person after all. But I don't read thrillers very often, so I can't really comment on, if you are somebody who does read a lot of thrillers, how it plays around with tropes within the genre or what it does different or things like that. I just thought it was atmospheric, it was fun. I had a good time buddy reading it with my mom, and now I want to pick up The Silent Patient by this author, and I want to see what else he writes. That's it for my a little bit of May and June wrap up. Let me know what you've been reading lately. Let me know your thoughts on these books as well. I will have any relevant links in the description bar down below. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.